Okay, I guess we're ready to begin. And again, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Foster, and I'll be the moderator for today's call. First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you from the TPSU and virtual town hall. This is a series of, we're on our 7th one at this point. Also, as we go through our discussion today, what I would like you to do is if you have any questions at any time, you can use the type the question into the panel, and we'll go over as many of those questions as we can. Unfortunately, if there are a lot of questions coming in, we might not be able to get to all of them, but we'll give you some references at the end where you'll be able to contact us for additional information. Also be aware that this program today qualifies for 1 hour of SHRM credit, and it also qualifies for HRCI. And so at the end of the program, when we complete all the questions in the panels, then what we're going to ask you to do is stay on for a couple more minutes, as we will give you a code, and Steph Chalk at the end will actually give you that code so you'll be able to get your appropriate credits both from SHRM and from HRCI. As far as our format today is we have 3 panelists joining me today. We have Diane Nagashima, who is the Chief Administrative Officer with the Retirement Advisory University in Jupiter, Florida. We have Steph Chalk, who's the Executive Director of the Retirement Advisory University, and he's the Managing Editor of the 401k TV in Jupiter. And we also have Fred Barnstein, who's the founder and CEO of the Retirement Advisory University and the founder and editor-in-chief of 401k TV. So we welcome the panel. But before we start, what I'd like to do is just go over, again, the format. What we'll be doing is we'll be going to each one of our speakers. And after each speaker has concluded with their comments, we'll then go to a poll. We'll be asking you to complete a poll again at the end of each person's discussion. We'll then take some questions from the audience as being compiled by DJ. We'll be taking those questions, and then we will show you the results, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. So again, that's what the format will look like. And before we start and actually get into our first discussion, let me just give you a little background on where we've done. As I said, this is our 7th in a series of virtual town hall meetings. We started back in 320. We actually had 4 advisors, and they talked about some of the common questions that they were getting from plan sponsors and participants. And one of the things they focused on, which I think is very important, is that when they're communicating, as well as yourselves are communicating with your plan participants, it's very important that you understand the various age groups that you're working with, especially when you're working with people who are nearing retirement, because the way you deliver your message to them is different than some of the millennials you might have working for you. So, gearing your presentation specifically to the various groups that you have within your organization, I think are very important. And we also talked about the fact that through this crisis, it's very important that you stay in close contact with your current advisor as well as the provider that you're using to provide your plan with its updates and also documentation and things of that nature. We then moved on to probably our biggest call of the year, and that was on 3/27. That should ring a bell with all of you, because that's the date that the CARES Act actually passed. It actually passed during our phone call. And we had several representatives there, one from Davis & Harmon, who was an attorney, another from Davis & Harmon, who was a lobbyist. We also had a representative from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and we also had another representative from DCEA, a trade organization representing 185 members. We went over some of the new laws, and we talked about the CARES Act. And I thought what I would do very quickly for you is just to give you an idea, an overview of what that bill looked like. There's actually 6 titles in the CARES Act. The first one was Title I, Keeping American Workers Paid and Employed Act. And that's where your Paycheck Protection Program came in. That's where all your various loans and whatnot we're talking about today. And that's what we'll be focusing on at the beginning of our call. We'll be talking to Diane about some of the things she's encountered as she's gone through some of this paperwork and some of the CARES Act requirements in order to get funding, both for TPSU and TREL. So I think that'll be interesting to see a personal experience as how this has affected her and our organizations. We then talked about the assistance for American workers, families, and businesses. This particular title dealt with what changes to retirement plans, like, as you know, the new loans, the $100,000 CRD, that's a coronavirus-related distribution. We also talked about the new loan limits. They've increased from 50% or 100, 50% or 50,000 up to 100% or 100,000. We also talked about some of the changes to the required minimum distributions and things of that nature. So most of your retirement plans information is contained in Title II. Title II also goes over some of the unemployment assistance programs that are out there. We then got into Title III, and Title III is supporting America's healthcare system in the fight against coronavirus. The main things to take from there was, this is the provision, this is the title that actually talked about paid leave and family leave. Title IV is talking about the economic stabilization and relief for severely distressed sectors. The next title was the Coronavirus Relief Funds, which dealt with $150 billion being allocated to states, territories, and tribes for expenses related to COVID. And then finally, Title VI was the $10 billion discussion with to the Postal Service and distributions to the Postal Service. So the three main titles that you would be interested in would be Title I, Title II, and Title III. And as I said today, we're going to be focused on Title II, and Diane will give you a discussion. I'm sorry, Title I, and Diane will be going over a discussion of how you take advantage of these various governmental programs. After that, we followed up with an advisor, consultant, and provider talking about how the CARES Act was actually affecting them and what they were doing and how they were communicating. And then we have several discussions after that, again, with panelists making up the HR discussion. Also, we had advisors, and also we had providers. And it was interesting to see the various ways that they were reacting, how they were interacting with you, and how you were interacting with them. We also talked about how your retirement committee should be interacting with both your providers and your advisors. And interestingly enough, the one thing to keep in mind is that although there hasn't been many changes made to the retirement plan, your investments, we said most people are staying the course. But keep in mind, you still have certain fiduciary issues that you're going to have to deal with, and Steph Chalk will be talking about some of those and how you as a plan sponsor have to really deal with some of the changes that have taken place. We also talked about leakage and how you can avoid leakage coming out of your plan, people taking distributions. And one of the things that I thought was a very good idea is that if you are dealing with clients, and you're dealing with participants rather, who are asking for a loan because of one of the coronavirus related distributions, they indicated that what they do, this is they being an advisor, they actually work with a plan sponsor like yourself, and they require that any distribution that's going to be taken from a plan due to the coronavirus distribution requirements, that they would have to go through the advisor first. So the advisor could help assist that participant in understanding all of the ramifications of taking that distribution and maybe suggest some alternatives that they might look to before they actually touch into their retirement plan, which of course exacerbates the problem even more in retirement, because they're taking away that time value of money, which is so important. And one of the advisors actually talked about that if you came out of the market because of one of the distributions, corona related, that you might miss the 10 best days of the market, and talking about how the adjustments would have to be made after that, especially for your older employers. Well, they don't really have the time to have that catch up that normally the younger persons would have to let the market serve its due course. The last program we had was talking about target date funds and their use and performance during this crisis, how they have fared. We also talked about the future of QDIAs and where they're going and what they might do in the future of investments. And then we talked about custom TDFs, that's target date funds and managed accounts, and what changes participants were making to their investments. And as we saw in our discussions, not much. Most of the employees, as I said, are staying the course. Most of you as plan sponsors, and we had a poll, said that you weren't doing anything really relative to your plan right now because, like yourselves, we're worrying about keeping your businesses open, taking care of your employees, and from an employees participant standpoint, they're worried more about paying their next bill rather than worrying specifically about their 401k. And so we'll talk a little bit about once this new normal is being dealt with, and I think Fred will address that in his discussion. What is the new normal? What does it look like? And when we do come through this crisis, what's the other side going to look like? And how are you going to deal with advances in technology and remote workers, and how you communicate effectively with remote workers? Has it been beneficial to your company? What are some of the logistic things that you're going through right now? What will you be doing in the future? So we've got a lot of to talk about today. But as I said, we're going to lead off with Diane. And as I said, Diane is she's actually the Chief Administrative Officer here at Trial and the TPSU. And Diane, you have had the responsibility, as I said, for the administrative functions of Trial, TPSU, and TPMI for 10 years. You have a tremendous amount of experience in doing so. You also have navigated the many changes that the organization has had to work through over the last 3 months. And during that time, you've worked with government agencies in bolstering Trial with additional resources over that same time. So you've really seen a lot of the practical application of the CARES Act and its impact on employers and employees. So Diane, for our listeners, could you please explain how you've been able to supplement TPSU and Trial organizations by working through the many governmental programs?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much, Tom, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us. I wanted to start out sort of on a positive note and to let people, know, even though this is a little further along in the process, there's still a lot of resources out there. And one of the things I recommend is my primary source of information has been the Small Business Administration, the SBA. And one of the best things that I have done was to go online, register, so that I get the updates to my email. And the other thing that the SBA recommends is that you look for your local district offices. So for example, I'm in Jupiter, I'm in South Florida. My district office, probably Miami, and because state by state, there will be some variation in terms of, unemployment policies, some other things. So that was one of the things. So I get my information from the SBA for the webinars, for updates, and things that I should look out for. What the SBA has said on the webinars, not the basic information necessarily about the Triple P or the IDLES, because that information changes and almost daily. And, for example, on the webinars, they won't release the slides, and they won't release certain information because they don't want the business owners to get stuck with old information. What they do say is just, call in, call directly, and or check in on these webinars. And they're almost daily. They're a couple of hours. And I find them very valuable. So that's one of the greatest resources. Now, what the SBA has said also is to please go to the treasury.gov website. That's where the main source of the information is coming from. And also to check on related websites. So you're getting a more holistic picture. So you look at the OSHA websites, the Department of Labor, the IRS, the CDC, and so you get an idea of where things are coming from. And they also recommend at SBA to please tune into your local and national news resources. And it could be, the television, it could be your traditional print online, because they said a lot of times they get the updates and they're able to communicate that into, something that a layperson can understand. So now for my purposes, I recommend, all of those things and being organized and also being very focused on this. So I knew what my specific company needs were. I just kind of had my goal, and it wasn't much different than my normal role of maintaining the accounts with the banks, et cetera, legal, all that. What changed with this was a little bit of a sense of urgency. Also, because this is a national situation, I also felt like it was a little bit more serious than just going to the bank and getting, a line of credit or something like that. So with that being said, before all of this, I value personal relationships, and I value my professional relationships, and I try to personalize those. I'm not saying that these are my best friends, but they certainly come in handy. So my bank, my lenders, my accountant, it's amazing what resources you may have already, financial advisor, my coworkers. These are resources that have been invaluable to me. I want to share two more things about the SBA before we continue. I had some struggles trying to get through. They're saying call the 800 number or contact the SBA through disaster customer service at sba.gov. These programs were so new that resources weren't set up yet. And when I tried to call the 800 number, I would be caller, 1,000, 2,000. So it wasn't manageable for me. So what I ended up doing was I would call really early in the morning, Texas time, and try to get somebody online to help me. And what I just learned today was if I wasn't getting the answer I needed, the people answering the phones initially is their other call center, and they're relatively new employees, many of them. If I can't get the answer, they said I should ask for a tier 2 assistance. And that will take me to someone who's more specialized. I could also call my district office, but a lot of them are filling in for the disaster managers who are taking care of the loans. So they're not always, the district offices aren't always there, but they are the people or the resources on the webinar. So you'll get to them eventually, because once you're on the webinar and they go through the program, you can call in and you can also chat. So you will, if you have a little patience, you can get through. The other tips, if you do email SBA directly or you do call them, be prepared. Use the full name of your registered business, have your EIN handy. And if you're talking about maybe a EIDL application, have that confirmation number handy. That will save you time, and that will help you, get the right person and the right information. So now with that being said, do you have any questions, or would you need something else?
And we do have a question here, Diane. It says, where can I find the most up-to-date resources that I can rely upon?
Well, just as I said, the first point would be your Small Business Administration, and that's sba.gov, and also the Treasury. So it's treasury.gov. So the information is coming from, from the government, coming through the treasury.gov website. That's the information your banks, your lenders will receive. Another great resource, if you have an accountant, that's a blessing. So your accountant is getting all this information real time, just as you're receiving it. But because of their expertise, they're going to be able to take you, your business, your business status into consideration and help you to figure out the right numbers that you're using, applying all of these loans in the right way. This is a very fluid process. And for example, right now in these webinars, they're advising businesses on how to organize and collect the information you're going to need to request forgiveness. And the catch is that there's no documentation that's available yet. There's no form, there's no application. It hasn't been, they're working on it. So it's not like you can go into any website and download it. So what they're saying is pretty much the same thing I'm saying, is take the information that you originally used to request the loans and just keep accumulating those things, the bank statements, the payroll records, etc. And regarding the payroll processor, we were very fortunate to use ADP. I went online to retrieve some employee information I needed to submit from my P. And I didn't realize this, but ADP had a separate section for the CARES Act. They had the information organized for the entire 2019 that I could use and submit with my documentation. Recently, I had to do something else with ADP, and they had an update for 2020. So resources like that are great to have, and just go in, print, get whatever you need. And the other thing, what I heard on the SBA was, prepare your documentation, and they don't know how you're going to turn this in yet. They assume it's going to be electronically, but if you try to turn in your loan docs or the information, the site, certain sites crash, whatever. So, be patient, have both hard copy and have your information electronically, as you would for any bank audit. Again, in terms of the information on a regular basis, an SBA reps have said you might want to do this daily. So it's the treasury.gov, the sba.gov, and then depending on your profession and your business, just go to the websites you normally frequent. So it could be a media resource. The banks update their website regularly, and which is a good thing. I just started looking at the OSHA and the CDC websites only because we're trying to get our office ready so that our employees can come back and we meet those guidelines. And I was sort of surprised that some of the things that we may have to have. So, it's the masks, the gloves, it's the wipes, the different things. And so look at it differently. The other thing the SBA had referenced today was there's going to be a to be determined issue. And it's the Department of Labor and your current HR policies. So everything that's happened over the last couple of months that's probably, caused some turmoil or has caused you to look and review what you currently have as an HR policy, HR guidelines. So what you want to do is, you want to submit whatever changes and everything else to either your labor or employment attorney or whoever you use. Again, document, because each thing that you do, as long as you have a reason and you're able to address it, take things very seriously, and you're able to kind of figure this out and protect yourself and the company. And one of them was forcing employees to use either the paid time off or to, getting employees to return to work. These are all things, now the SBA is saying, these are all things you want to do. These are things you should do in writing and formally. So, not just calling an employee back and saying, come back to work, but having almost from the beginning, like an offer of work returning on this day, and this is what's going to happen going forward. In the event that things change, you're just, again, documentation and being organized.
Yeah, Diane, I had a couple questions for you. First of all, I agree with you that in times like this, documentation is the key, because if there's an opportunity where you might be audited, they're going to be looking at some of those documentation records to make sure that you've followed their guidelines, which brings me to two other questions. First question is, and you've had several conversations with the SBA and other organizations, have you found the messaging consistent amongst the various calls and the various agencies, Diane?
I have found the SBA to be as consistent as the current events allow them to be. And so for example, I was already in March just, to tackle this thing. Everything is great. I had all the forms filled out. And the day before I was going to submit everything, the SBA said, wrong form, things have changed. But they've been very candid about what's changed and how this has changed and what iteration this is. So now we're on, maybe change 5 or 6. So that's another reason to keep up with this. Don't go once or once a week. You need to keep up to see what has changed. And it's been a little challenging for me because I don't think the same way that the SBA or the Treasury thinks. So when you tell me something, like it's black and white. What I don't understand, is when they change something, I wish they would say, this is what changed. This is what it was, and this is what changed. That would help me. That part I'm not getting. All they're saying is, well, you can't use that anymore. An example would be, when this all started, we were going to use a net payroll. So the employee salary would have been net. And then shortly after that, it changed to gross. So if they had said things like, if they were more clear and they said, okay, this is net to this point, disregard, from this day on, it's gross. That would be helpful. That's just an example of where things are.
So in other words, it wasn't an automatic thing where they would send you, okay, Diane, here's a change to the net versus gross or whatever. This is something you'd have to ask through an additional question or additional call?
Yes, and that's actually a good point. It would have been nice if they said, well, here are the 10 changes or the 10, amendments. That didn't happen. And I think one of the things that is this is all real time. They're getting that as things are happening. On their chat section of their webinars, I can see the same question being asked in different ways. For example, one of the things that came up today, which to me is a little unsettling, is the definition of a full-time employee. And the Treasury has one, and that's a 40-hour employee full-time. There are different sectors, I guess, within the government who reference Obamacare or who reference SBA. That's a 30-hour employee, and so there's not a range. It's either this or that. A couple of things where I'm concerned is you have to use the funds properly. I get that. But then when they start using percentages, you have to use 100%, the 75% of the, for the triple P, for the payroll to get the full forgiveness. Sounds very simple. But when I hear the callers with their webinar questions, and they're asking, well, if I have a portion left over, then I just repay that back or return the money, or does it jeopardize my entire triple P that I was using for payroll? So there's an all or nothing concept that was introduced. And the SBA administrator said, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. So
Right.
Those are things that are unanswered. So they try to answer as best they can. To me, I don't know, it's honest, but it doesn't help me.
Yeah, I think that's been a consistent question, Diane, from a lot of people getting involved in this program. Is we know that you talked about forgiveness, that 75% has to be used specifically for payroll and employees, but what about that other 25%? So what you're telling me is really unclear, and there's still a lot of questions relative to what to do with that additional 25%. Is that correct?
Yes, and it also depends on the SBA rep that is on that particular webinar. Now, the reps have been excellent and very helpful and kind and supportive. I'm not taking anything away from them.
Sure.
But someone came up with a question today about safe harbor. And the rep said, what do you mean? What is a safe harbor? So again, it's not the right form to be that specific to that.
Right.
But the rep, so they cleared it up. It's retirement or 401k. So that just leads me to believe that as informed as they are at this time with the information that's out there, there's still a lot of open areas that need to be addressed. So those are concerned. We had addressed that with our financial advisor early on, and their advice was, don't do anything you wouldn't normally do. So just sort of be conservative and cautious. So that's our route. We're being cautious.
That's good. I think that's a good idea, Diane. And it also proves that what you said is, try to work with people that really understand this. You said you work with your accountant, and I think that's very important. The people that understand it, they're working with it on a day-to-day basis. I think that's very important. And like you say, it's not only a learning process for all of us, but it's also a learning process for some of those governmental employees, because they're having to understand it as well. So we have to give them a little slack, but also we need some answers to our questions. And speaking of questions, DJ, why don't we go to our first poll question? And you can see here, have you received PPP or Paycheck or Protection Program or EDL, the Economic Injury Disaster? If you can select all that will apply. So we'll give you a second to take a look at that. And as we're doing that, DJ, do we have any other additional questions from the audience?
Yeah, so we had a couple, well, actually we had a lot, and I'm sure Diane could probably take over the whole show, but just a couple of ones that relate to the poll. We have, can we apply for PPP funds and EIDL funds simultaneously? And then about how long does it take to receive PPP funds?
Okay, Diane, would you like to give a quick answer to that?
Yeah, I can't answer that. So it depends on your situation, on your circumstances, and the way your business is structured. So for us, we have, W-2 employees, so we applied for the triple P, and we applied for the EIDL, so we received the triple P money, and it took like 27 days from start to finish, but we were in a weird space where they ran out of funding, so I think we were funded in the second batch, and according to the SBA, they have been refunded. There's money sitting there. There's also a situation where the companies, I guess there were large companies that actually received triple P money early on, will be returning some monies. So they are encouraging people to continue to apply for the triple P program. With your lender, you have to find your 7A lender, or you go onto the SBA website and you can see where you can look for those resources. On the EIDL side, that was all through the SBA website. And I did the Express, we did get some funding from that, but that one was a little bit harder for me to understand because my accountant said, here's what you do. You go on, you answer all the questions truthfully, you get through, you get a application confirmation number, and then you wait, which is what we did. One of the, I guess, the things that you know that you're on track is your credit rating agency, like an Experian or something, will get a hit, and so you'll see that they're checking up on you. The problem with the EIDL is they don't track those loan applications, which I think is odd. They're not using technology, I think, the way they should. But I have the loan application confirmation number, but they can't, when I contact the SBA or I call in or email, they can't look up my application. They can just tell me it's being processed. You know, it starts with these numbers. You're going to just have to wait. And that's kind of where, you know, and I've tried several times and I've tried to you know, pose the questions differently, but it's pretty much the same thing. You know, they're overwhelmed. I'm in the queue. That was another response, and that I just have to wait. And now on the PPP, I was able to call my bank and get some assistance, and that was nice because the information went through the bank, and then that went through SBA. So I was thankful that I had a great relationship with them. I had used a different bank because, you know, they weren't ready for the PPP, and that actually had our operating account, and they're processing the EIDL loans, and they were so overwhelmed that their bank reps and their representatives couldn't help me the way they normally would. But they said that, you know, I just need to check in. So EIDL, I've heard on the webinar, some people got both. And right now, at this time, more people are getting the PPP money than anything else. So we're still waiting for more information on the EIDL, and that's all we've applied for so far.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And on behalf of Trial and TPSU, thank you for your diligence, Diane. I'm sure all the employees really appreciate your hard work. So let's put up the answer to our poll questions. And this is pretty consistent. You can see that the responses, and looks like something I think everybody would anticipate. The only thing, like you said, Diane, is most of the companies did receive their EDL funding, and but a very small percentage. So interesting results, and I'd like to spend some more time on this poll, but I'd like to now go to our next speaker, and that's Steph Chalk. And Steph, you've got over 40 years of financial and asset management experience. You have observed many ups and downs in the markets and in business in general. And as executive director of Trial and the affiliated companies, you get to work closely with plan sponsors and retirement plan fiduciaries. Would you give our listeners sort of an idea of what plan sponsors and plan fiduciaries are focusing on today?
Sure, Tom. Thank you. And thanks to everyone who's joining today. I think to understand where we are for a snapshot today, we need to take a step back and understand from where we've come. So in the 1st of January, things were pretty okay for all of us relative to what we're going through with the pandemic. But as things started to go haywire in the United States, obviously businesses were scrambling to determine what business are they actually in. Are we an airline, or are we a restaurant business, and how will we be impacted? They also took a hard look at cash flow, and with the eye to how long can we survive. And then the question became, do we need to make a change in our organization? Do we need to make a change in the products that we offer? Do we need to make a change in services? And what about our workforce? How does that change? So what that brings us to is, after coming through the CARES Act and the Secure Act, we are in a position where employers are wondering whether they should furlough people or lay people off, and whether the hours should be adjusted, whether it's up or down, depending on who it is and the functions that are being performed. And do we shuffle functions in our organization among the employees? So the short word that would tell us where we are today, it's remote workers. And there are more people working remotely than ever have before. And the remote staffing has, it's been new for many people, for most people. Other organizations who had remote workers really had a leg up in the race in order to have a process for that. So when you're looking at a remote workforce, which almost everyone is now, you have to look operationally and determine from an operations standpoint, do my employees have the equipment? Do they have the connections? Are they in a position to be able to work? And then secondarily, can they function where they are? And can they function from a technology standpoint or applications that they might have? And apps are becoming very widely used now. And so as we flip that to the retirement side, something that you had mentioned earlier, Tom, when a plan sponsor, an employer, has a request for a distribution, I think it does make a lot of sense that the advisor would be involved in that, just from an awareness standpoint, so that the company can use the advisor in a role of coaching the person who needs to take the distribution or wants to make a loan, just so that that individual can have the best possible information upon which to make the withdrawal or make the needs for the financial need met. So the challenge on the remote workforce, though, is it becomes in how do you prioritize what each of these remote workers will be doing, what they can be doing, and then how do you position that? So first prioritizing, what functions can we run remotely? And certainly a lot of firms have figured that out, but it took some time to get there. And then positioning the worker so that they can deliver the best possible product or the best possible outcome for the company in this remote location. Also, you have how does content or reports, how does that get distributed among a diverse and remote workforce? A lot of organizations and prevalent, obviously, in the financial services area, they have restrictions on what they can and cannot distribute outside of the organization. There are restrictions on what computers can transmit both directions as well. And I think everybody has to keep an eye open for cybercrime right now, because with so many things and from a procedural standpoint changing inside organizations, and retirement plans are obviously one of those areas. With so much changing, the time is ripe for people to take advantage of procedures not being followed normally, and the addition of new procedures. So how the content is presented, whether it's coming in verbally or whether it's coming in an email, et cetera, or whether people are accessing reports remotely, that is a big issue for organizations right now. And then probably what we see as being told the most difficult part of having a remote workforce is how do we measure the progress of the individual who's working remotely? So how do we actually manage that? Do we have a system for monitoring that progress monitoring the process and managing the data? So I think that's where we are right now as far as the struggle with the remote workforce is it's not getting people operational, it's not getting people functional, but it's more, okay, as an employer, I'm responsible for a certain level of performance from either a team or an individual. And how do I monitor that appropriately? How do I measure that relative to the conditions they're working under and what they're actually dealing with? So I think that's exactly where we are right now, is the things are chugging along from an employer-employee relationship in a remote environment, but how do we know we're doing everything properly, and how do we measure that progress?
Right, and I would imagine measuring success is very important. But Steph, it's interesting. One of the calls we have with an HR specialist, we asked about how she communicates with her employees remotely, and she indicated that her business is based upon remote workers and communicating with them and measuring their efficiency. So it would seem to me, aren't there studies that people could turn to look to see how they measure those things, and talk to people like the HR specialists that we had on to see how they did and how they measure it? Are there such studies like this?
There certainly are, and the in talking with these folks, the challenge is that these studies, the baseline on these studies is not from a pandemic. The baseline is, in a lot of cases, from a 2019 study or a study as of year-end 2019, but nothing relative to what we're going through now. So there'll be a period, just as there was a period of getting people operational, and there was a period of time that it took to get people functional. But later in the year, there can be some reasonable expectations set upon remote workers. But as of right now, it seems to be a guess, and many employers feel that they're getting some effectiveness and some return on it, but they don't really have the metrics yet to be able to absolutely know if they're getting what they should be getting, or if there is a shortfall, is it in the process or is it in the employee?
Absolutely. And I think once the crisis passes, which hopefully it will, there'll be a lot of new lessons learned, and hopefully if things like this were to happen again, God willing they do not, but at least they'll have something to fall back on in crisis like this, and that'll be the teacher for the future opportunities that might come up as a result of that. So thank you very much, Stefan. Let's go to our next poll question. Okay, rate your ability, its performance of your workforce during this crisis. Falls exactly into what we were talking about. So take a look at that and tell us what you think about how you're able to effectively measure that. And while we're going over the poll question, what about yourself, DJ? Do you have any questions from the audience?
I don't think Steph was as interesting as Diane. I do not have any myself, but I did have a comment, if you don't mind, from my perspective. Just wanted to kind of talk to Steph, talking about cyber crimes, and just even today, we had one of our employees message me with a Zoom invitation. So people are going to attack what is popular, and right now that is very popular. It was a very well done invitation. So I caution everyone. Obviously, I don't have time to teach the tells of that you need to look for in these emails, but do your due diligence. And I know a lot of you may not be around your IT specialists, but make sure you're double checking if something doesn't look right. Now's the time where they're going to come after you with emails like that. So just a comment on something that we deal with all the time, but just be cautious.
Yeah, that's a good point, DJ, because I just saw a special the other day specifically on that point, that these hackers are now looking at the popular websites like Zoom, and they're definitely hacking into those. So that's a word of caution for all of you to be aware of when these invitations do come about. So let's take a look at the results of our poll, if you don't mind, DJ. Okay, and I think this sort of falls in line with what you were saying, Steph, is that we only have so much to use as a measurement, and as this grows, hopefully these statistics will become a little bit more effective. Does that poll look primarily what you thought it would look like, Steph?
It does, from the standpoint of if I don't know if it's excellent and I don't know if it's difficult, it's probably okay. But so again, everybody's determining their own baseline. They're determining their own measures, and it'll be a while before anybody can really go onto one of those extremes of it's performing excellently or it's very difficult for us to measure what's going on in our organization at the workflow level.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your input, Steph. Now let's go to Fred. Fred, you're an industry visionary, and you have a good eye towards understanding the future. Your firms have successfully educated over 1,200 retirement specialists and over 6,000 plan sponsor fiduciaries. Fred, you've seen how this change is taking place in the world. And what I want to know is, how are advisors, how has their life changed since January 1? And with all the changes that are occurring for the advisors and plan sponsors, what is the most effective way for a plan sponsor to be working with their advisor? What should plan sponsors be asking of their advisor? And then finally, Fred, give us an idea of what you feel the new normal will look like when we do hopefully come out of the other end of this crisis.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I think what I'm seeing here is, we're getting a real-time crash course on dealing with remote working. And we've had a lot of technology out there and a lot of tools. in the last 10 years, but we haven't seen a lot of increase in productivity like we did after the internet came out. It takes some time. And I think that this crisis is forcing people, especially around dealing remotely, how do I leverage those tools? And I think we're seeing a lot of that in terms of how advisors and providers and really how plan sponsors should be, leveraging their providers through technology. I think that committee meetings, which were starting to go remote, I think they're almost all going to go remote. It makes more sense for people to meet in that way. And I think with the technology we have today, you don't lose that much inner activity. I think the greatest benefit is going to be using this remote technology, whether it's Zoom or GoToMeeting, with working with, whether educating, guiding, or providing advice to participants. It can be done off hours, and what we find and hearing is not only are you talking to the employer, but you might be talking to her spouse, and they're important in that conversation. One of the questions we got from an advisor during the many webinars, Tom, that you and I and Steph have been doing, from an advisor is, well, how do I communicate with my participants in the plans I have? And our answer was, if you haven't established a protocol and a system and an education and advice and guidance system already, it's going to be too late. But the ones who have established that before and we're leveraging technology, they're doing great. We talked to one advisory firm who we're going to be setting up virtual training meetings for their community. And we said, well, you need it to be local. And they go, no, we work with plans all over the country because 3 years ago we went remote. We service all of our clients remotely. And I think that this crash course in remote access is now people are realizing it's actually pretty good. It's not 100%. We lose spontaneity, team building and camaraderie, gets lost. But I think the efficiencies and the, ways to get together once in a while or less, and the lack of commuting, I think is really beneficial. What we're also seeing is financial wellness tools, and I have to say I'm a pretty big skeptic when it comes to financial wellness and changing behavior. But when you combine technology and advisors who have a documented, well thought out process that have access to smart data, good data, then the technology takes off. But the technology on their own doesn't work, the data on its own doesn't work, and the advisor, without leveraging technology to the vast workforce, especially now that more and more are going to be remote, doesn't work. They have to be combined. And we're actually starting to see providers, record keepers, finding a way, how can we start delivering participant data actually to the advisor to help the individual participants in the plan? And we're seeing an opening up of that. I also think that the good advisors and the good platforms are not only doing investment performance reviews, which is pretty standard, but participant activity, telling the plan sponsor, here's what your employees are doing. They're changing funds, they're taking loans, they're taking distributions, whatever. They're increasing their deferral, they're decreasing. How does that look by demographics, by age, or by wage, or by type of job? Those are the things that we're seeing the good advisors and the providers be able to do. I think this is all very much a test of mobile accessibility. Are the portals, whether it's to the advisor or to your record keeper, are they available on mobile, and how do they work? Are people able to use them? And what is that ease of use? We're getting a great test for that. So I think that those are some of the things that we're seeing that good, and progressive advisors and record keepers are doing, and always, it's what you want your provider to be is certainly if you have questions and you have issues, they're there. But are they reaching out to you, whether it's in person or through technology? Are they providing webinars, portals, answers, resources beyond just retirement and retirement savings? Those are the ones who I think are going to shine. And I think those advisors and providers who have done a good job during the crisis are going to leverage that, those stories and those relationships to be able to really get more and more clients on that. Tom?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, what I was asking you, Fred, is in a lot of the plan, the virtual town halls that we've done and working with advisors, many of them had said, like we mentioned during the call, that they're requesting the employer when a participant asks for a withdrawal because of a CARES Act provision, that they talk to the advisor first so he can look at other suggestions or she can look at other suggestions. Do you think it makes sense, Fred, that now in this time of crisis where there's a renewed sort of focus on financial wellness and education, would it make sense for employers to have perhaps ancillary benefits that they offer to their employees on a voluntary basis, such as HSAs and student loans, emergency funds, and things of that nature? Do you think now's the time to start looking at some of those programs?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, our next town hall that we'll be partnering with next Friday at 1 o'clock with the CIA and Spark is emergency saving sidecars that are alongside the defined contribution plan. And we'll have a great panel from Prudential and AARP and Commonwealth, which is a not-for-profit. So I think what we will be seeing in the future, and we're starting to see a little bit, is this convergence of wealth, retirement, and benefits all together. And so whether it's an HSA, emergency savings, we think are going to proliferate because it's also a good alternative to loans. And like we saw with just 401k, if it's automatic enrollment versus waiting for people to do it, and maybe the first money should go in there, we still have to figure out with emergency savings, which we'll talk about next week, is how can we get distributions? Because if it's an emergency, you can't wait a week for the check. If your car is broken down on the side of the road, you can't wait a week for the check to come and find you. So we're going to see all of that. We're starting to see providers, record keepers, integrating those voluntary benefits and the health care and retirement and savings. And even there's one large bank that's trying to bring banking to the work site benefits and savings. So yes, I think that's all coming together. And I think that all the trends, but particularly this one, are going to be accelerated by this crisis. The remote working, the financial wellness, but the convergence of wealth retirement is going to make a big progress in the future.
Great, thank you very much, Fred. So DJ, if we could look at our last poll question. Okay, rate your ability to remotely communicate with your plan advisor during this crisis. And you see your choices there. And DJ, are there any last questions from the audience before we wrap this up and go to our final discussion?
Yeah, we have a couple here which related to how can we find or what is a prudent method for finding a remote advisor?
Fred, is that something you'd like to address?
Yeah, sure. I think the answer is all advisors should have the ability to communicate and service you remotely. Some are ahead of the curve. So I don't think that, for example, the firm that I was talking about, which is in the Midwest, they were just, miles and miles ahead. I think what you're going to find is that those advisors that are affiliated with larger organizations that are focused on retirement, we call them aggregators, others Sage use, CapTrust, NFP, Hub. Those advisors are going to be able to leverage technology greater or more than the advisor who's on their own. So there's lots of advisors that are on their own, they're independent, they're good, but this does take some heavy lifting on it. And I think it's also, the advisor themselves. Are they, comfortable with technology? Are they, moving towards it, or are they reluctantly doing it and, being pulled along? So, it's a really good question, but I don't know that anybody yet has positioned themselves and marketed themselves as a remote advisor, but I think it's a great idea.
Thank you, Fred. Let's take a look at the results of our last poll. And you can see that in this particular case, many of the plan sponsors on the call today are having a good relationship with that plan advisor remotely. And I think this is going to be a trend for the future. So I'd like to wrap this up, ladies and gentlemen, and I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Diane and Fred and Steph for their interesting comments throughout the course of this discussion. I also want to thank you for taking time from your busy day. A replay of today's panel will be available on 401ktv.com next week, as well as a summary of the other virtual town halls that we've done in the past. The next TPSU virtual town hall meeting will be on Friday, May 22nd at 1 p.m. That concludes our virtual town hall meeting for today. And for those of you that are seeking either SHRM or HRCI credit, please stay tuned for a few moments, and then Steph will come on the call and give you a code. From my perspective, I'd like to thank you all for your attention and for your engaging with us today. And I wish you all a very safe and healthy year to come.